My GSXR750 project. It featured GB motor rear sets, modified headers, came complete with scuff marks and crash knobs. Overall it's reasonably tidy, but certainly needed some work and needed a lot of parts added to it. As you can see on the opposite side, there's still a few marks on the frame, there's a little bit of corrosion on the cover. Good points is it had a new chain, the bad points it was missing the bar ends and the decent grips. The front had a damaged guard, it was missing the lights, it had really good tyres on it, Power Pilot tyres front and rear, which is great. Radiator's a little bit damaged on this as well. Came with a carbon fairing stay. It's obviously missing a few panels and there's some wire routing issues around the carbon stay as well, so there are issues that needed to be sorted out with this bike. The tank is in reasonable condition, it's not dented or anything, it does a few scratches and things, and the tank cover was scratched. The ram air tubes were missing, well they weren't really missing, they were damaged and it only came with one key. The rear tower was obviously missing fairing, no lock mechanism, had no lights, the tip sensor had been relocated, the exhaust valve servo was missing and the under tray was missing, so there was a fair bit of work to do to get it up to scratch again. The front wiring loom was missing switch blocks, steering damper had been removed, and the worst part actually was that the front wiring loom had actually been cut and damaged, so because I didn't really have a decent, because I hadn't pulled this bike apart and I didn't have a decent idea of what should have been there, I ended up having to order a new wiring loom for this, for the front of the bike, just to make life a little bit easier. Moving to the front of the bike, we have damaged grips. I want to change the levers. We had a missing horn, and we've got braided brake lines. One of the other sort of rougher things is that we've got a missing reservoir bracket, which needs to be replaced. The front tyre and rim, the tyres are good. We've got Power Pilots on the front, good tidy rims and good discs. Almost brand new, pretty much all the stuff, so that was a really good thing with this bike. With the left side lower, we had GB rear sets, which I've already mentioned. We're missing the chain guard, we had the covers looking a little bit rough, and we've got a scuff on the frame as well, so all of these things all need to be addressed. With the clock, we only had low Ks, we had 13,600 Ks, we got a faulty fuel gauge unfortunately, but the good news is the engine sounds great. The radiator on the bike was damaged to some degree. It wasn't damaged to the point where it was leaking, but things like the cap, the way the cap mounted and where it mounted was bent and damaged. The brackets, the mounting brackets were also damaged, so I sort of made a decision that it would be better to just replace the radiator rather than messing around trying to straighten it. On the right lower side of the bike we had a bit of scuffing on the cases once again, modified headers, missing exhaust valve, and also missing oxygen sensor. On the right rear of the bike we had Power Pilots, scuffed swing arm, missing hugger, the side stand setup is particularly poor, and missing pillion pegs. All of these are things that we're going to need to be addressed in order to get the bike roadworthy again. On the right rear of the bike we had a bit of a mark on the swing arm. We're missing a brake switch, and this was a problem because of the GB motor rear set, so even if we had the original switch we wouldn't be able to use it because the GB motor rear sets have no capability for that type of switch, so we need to find a way to resolve that. We're also missing an exhaust hanger, and this was also going to present as a problem because we needed to hang a new exhaust on this bike. The front guard was particularly rough. Someone had taped it up with duct tape for some reason. I have no idea whether it was cracked or anything underneath this, but it certainly needed to be replaced. It wasn't a pretty sight at all. Some of the parts supplied were a headlight, I think from an 08 model. It certainly won't fit this bike. We managed to grab some rubber grommets off this and saved them from a few other parts that we came, and it was good because I needed those rubber grommets when it came down to fitting the new fairing kit. It came with braided lines on the front of the bike, right up to the master cylinder, which was great because it just saved me having to spend money doing that myself, so I was pretty happy to have that on the bike. We got a random mid pipe with the bike. This just came in a box, sort of as one of the spare bits and pieces that we had. I've got no idea what it's from or what it was supposed to fit on, but it certainly wasn't much use for this bike. Well, nothing I was doing anyway. The elusive switch block we managed to find in the box as well, which was great. So it was good to have this extra switch block because I knew I was going to need this in order to get the lights and everything working again. As I found out later, we found that it was actually missing a clutch switch as well, and this is quite important because on the GSXR the ECU needs the clutch switch in order to be able to operate correctly with the bike, and if you don't have a clutch switch then you have problems with the bike thinking that it's in a false neutral and it never gives you full power. I ordered an aftermarket fairing kit in matte black and gloss. It arrived with a few extra goodies such as a screen, some 3D decals, headlight, tail light and indicators. We ship kits for people. We can ship everything in one box to save you a few dollars as well. You can buy the parts at fairingsolutions.com.au. The first thing that I fitted was the new front guard, and I reused a lot of the OEM hardware that came with the old guard. Fitting's definitely simpler if you have a front stand and you can remove the front wheel. It wasn't a major problem, but it was definitely easier if you've got the front stand. My front stand was in use when I did this particular job, so I didn't have it available. I next attempted to fit the airbox cover. This is inside of the new airbox cover with the mounting bracket fitted. Everything bolts in nicely using the OEM hardware. It's a pretty easy and simple thing to fit. This is how the airbox cover looked once it was fitted. It's very similar to the OEM airbox. I had 3D chrome decals fitted to mine, and it's a pretty good fit. The next job was piecing together the front headlight assembly. I had to buy multiple packets of rubber grommets from a local hardware store, as I basically didn't get enough of my bike. Fitting the front together was probably the most challenging job, as I had no reference for assembly, as I didn't disassemble the bike myself. I ended up printing an online schematic from a parts website that I found online, and I based my reassembly on that, but it still was fairly challenging. A free screen comes supplied with the fairing kit. The typical screen that you'll get with your kit will be a dark tint like this one, but if requested we can supply a clear or a light tint screen free with the fairing kit also. To mount the free screen I used well nuts, and this is the easiest way to mount your screen to your fairing or to your upper fairing. Often the holes will need to be drilled out larger to accommodate the fasteners, as they're not quite big enough out of the factory. Once the holes were drilled larger, I fitted it using the well nut fasteners, and the next job was to install the headlight and the ram air tubes. The headlight that I utilised in this fairing kit is an aftermarket headlight. It fitted quite nicely into the kit. It was pretty much the same fit as an OEM headlight with no dramas involved with the fitting. So I was able to utilise the original hardware and some new bits and pieces that I had in order to fit it. The next thing was to get the rubber grommets into the ram air tubes and get the ram air tubes located so that I could mount those onto the upper headlight area. It's quite a fiddly job mounting these ram air tube holders. I got stuck at this point also because I was missing decent ram air tubes. The set that I had been chopped, unfortunately, to make them useful for racing, but they were no use for road use. I ended up ordering a set of aftermarket ram air tubes to suit the bike. Where the ram air fits, I used a piece of leftover adhesive foam to create a seal where the tubes meet into the fairing. This helps stop rattles and when you're riding, and it also holds the tubes firmly in place, and this is very similar to what's found in the OEM pieces of fairing. When I was fitting the loom, what I found was that a lot of the loom had been chopped out, again because it's been modified for racing, and it was pretty much useless to me. Too many connectors were missing, so I ended up having to buy a new loom, and this also held me up for a little while on this build. I next mounted the fairing stay and the clocks to the fairing stay. I ended up having to remove the carbon fibre stay as it was not accurate enough to fit the headlights and the mirrors, the holes were just in the wrong places. It's very typical of carbon fibre and other aftermarket parts. I added CNC mirrors as I don't like the plastic ones that come with the standard bike, and one issue I had to address is the front indicators are normally integrated into the mirrors, and I obviously didn't have them in the new CNC mirrors, so that was one thing I was going to have to address during this build. I added an aftermarket steering damper to the front as the factory one was missing, and I really wanted to have a steering damper on the front of the bike to avoid head shakes. I'd already made a decision to replace the radiator, so I decided to go with a better quality radiator with better heat dissipation, and that's what I was doing here, was swapping parts over and getting it ready to mount. The radiator was pretty much exactly the same as the OEM from an installation point of view, and it didn't take long to install it, so I took the time to play with a couple of sets of different heaters that I had to see which would work better with my new exhaust system. There's another picture of the radiator fitted from the side. It was pretty straightforward to fit. I next test fitted the nose to see if it was going to fit and to make sure all the wiring was in the right places and check all the switch blocks and things like that. I just did this as a temporary thing. I had this nose on and off a number of times during this whole process. The emission system on this bike had been fiddled about with quite a bit, and a lot of things blocked off and taped off. It certainly wasn't very good, so I really wanted to fix those things, so I had to order a lot of new plumbing, and so I could restore the system and get it working as it should. My next job was installing some new levers and new grips. I installed new foldable adjustable levers, which are way better, and the grips were also way better. You can see the adjustable grips from this side, adjustable and foldable. They could become shorty levers, or you can use them with a bit of length depending on how you want to set them up. They're like a CNC machined piece, quite nice. Next installation was the tail fairing. There's quite a few pieces to assemble on this, so it's quite a reasonable sized job. The tail and the front are probably two of the biggest sections you have to install on this bike, or that you need to put together. They're fairly extensive parts to put together. On this particular bike I was missing the bracket that holds the rear tail light in, so I fashioned a couple of brackets out of a piece of strap aluminium and started to use that to fasten it back in. I then began mounting the indicators into the left hand side clipped together parts on this fairing. I first did a test fit just to make sure that everything was going to fit in there nicely and it was going to work okay. This is the indicator fitted to one of the side parts. It fits together with a self-tapping screw. Quite simple hardware is used to mount these into the side pieces. I then began mounting the side pieces onto the main tail section. This used a combination of bolts and screws to get this together, and well nuts. I find well nuts are quite useful for putting this type of thing together. This is what a well nut looks like. You just drill the holes out slightly larger, and then once you pop this through, the backside rubber of this nut will actually start to pull everything together nice and tight. It's good in areas where you can hide the screws and where you've got the space to do it, and I use these a lot on my fairing installations. There's another picture down towards where the rider seat is, with it mounted together with the well nut in the hole fastened down, and you can see how the back side of the well nut's pulling the thing together. The left and right sides of the tail, when you mount them to the centre section, there's a lot of clipped together lugs and pieces in here, and it can be quite fiddly to get it together nicely. It takes a little bit of work, but once it's done it does come together quite nicely. This is the upper view of it. The next job that I had to do was to sort out the rear seat cowl. The hardware is just swapped straight over, so it's a pretty simple job. This is the rear seat cowl with the hardware mounted to it. I just swapped it over from the original seat cowl. It does actually come with its own hardware as well, but I prefer to use the original OEM hardware wherever I can. And next I did a test fit of the rear fairing onto the bike, onto the rear subframe, and it all fitted together quite nicely, which was good. And this completed the first part of my tasks, really getting the front of the tail mounted. I was pretty happy to get this finished, pretty happy with the end result. So this concludes the first part of the GSXR750 build. I've got the nose fitted, the tank cover fitted, and the tail fairing fitted now. It's all temporary, of course, because I'll probably need to take bits and pieces off again to put under trays and other bits and pieces on, but the next major installation is going to be the carbon fibre bits and pieces and the side fairings and the exhaust, the final installation of the exhaust.